This episode of the Lunch with Chris show is brought to you by my upcoming book, 30 Days to Limitless. You can find out more about it at limitless30.com.
This podcast is certified fresh. Freshmediaworks.com.
Welcome to Lunch with Chris. We're your host, Chris Daly, brings you uplifting interviews with extraordinary individuals making a positive impact. Join as he introduces remarkable people who have left their mark on their respective fields.
Have you ever thought about doing your own podcast? It is the absolute best way to grow your brand, spread your message, and build your following. Fresh Media Works can help. We do all the heavy lifting, and you just focus on your message. To find out how easy we can make launching your new podcast, call 713-269-4620 or check us out at freshmediaworks.com.
My next guest is a professor of history. And before you think, oh, geez, history, how boring. Not when Professor Bob talks about it. He is a fellow OG podcaster whose show, History According to Bob, I fell in love with. All right, everybody, join me in welcoming Bob Packett. Is it Professor?
Yeah, it's Professor Pack. Professor Bob's what I go by on the podcast.
I love it. And you are the host of one of my early favorite podcasts, History According to Bob. When did you start that?
In 2005, March the 15th.
Nice. Yeah, I was in 2004, and when I discovered you, I was like, I absolutely love this show because it talks about things you don't hear in your high school history books.
Oh, that's for sure.
Or even your college courses. You know, you go into such great detail. Let's back up, though, and tell me about what your background and how you got into this.
Well, I'm master's degree in ancient history, undergraduate degree in Napoleonic history and medieval history. I was an educator. I taught 30 years at Park Hill High School, one of the best public high schools in Kansas City. Was department chair, and I worked for 30 years at the community college as a professor of history, Western Civ and American history. Although they overlap 15 years, so I'm not 100.
I love it.
And what happened was in 2004, my wife, who was teaching herself how to do coding, found these people doing podcasts. It was really new, and it was all tech stuff. It was all jargon, science, and stuff like that. She came down to my office and said, I think I found something that's just made for you.
I love it.
All you have to do is talk. And so all I had was a MP3 handheld recorder initially. And so I would sit there in my office and try to visualize a classroom, because that was the hardest thing initially. I'm used to speaking to a group of people. With nobody there, I'm not getting any feedback from eye contact, moaning, or all that type of feedback. So I put pictures up of various people around the room so that that would give me something to look at. And then she did all of the other parts of it. Mm-hmm. And the first show was, why in the world did the Roman government give Caesar a state funeral? And that was just bizarre. So she put it up. Yeah. And the first week we had 30 people listen. Yeah. And she had all set up with a little hosting area. And then the next week we had 300. Mm-hmm. And then we were running out of bandwidth. So we expanded the bandwidth, and then it got to the point I can't expand it at my own cost anymore. Yeah. And so I asked for some donations, and we got $400 or $500 the first day. And then we got a note from someone. I do not know who this is. We have never found out who it was. And he gave us a link, and he said, use this. You'll never have to worry about this again. And I don't know where it is, but I have had unlimited, and so I've never paid a dime for bandwidth again.
That's awesome.
And that's how it started.
I was just say, like I said, I started in, and I was doing a high school football one. So, you know, I too, it was like, this is all tech stuff, but I want to try and see what it becomes. And then, like I said, early 2005, I discovered your show, being a history fan, and the fact that you had a different approach to it. If you could talk about what makes you different from somebody reading from a textbook.
Well, first of all, as a teacher, I hardly ever used the textbook. It was I had a depth of knowledge that when I did my undergraduate degree, you could get your undergraduate degree with 30 hours of history. But the college I went to had a comprehensive program. I ended up with 110 hours of history. And then when I went to my master's degree with my professors, we were almost to the end. All I needed was my thesis, and she died. And we couldn't, and I'm in the process of getting a new job, so I never finished the thesis and had to finish at UMKC here in Kansas City, and they, of course, only took 6 hours of my stuff. So I have 56 hours worth of master's degree level work. And one of the things that has happened, I always liked the way various teachers that I had over the years taught. I never had a teacher who, we were given the chapter to read when we were done, but we were always doing something.
Yeah.
And we had people who showed videos and did all sorts of stuff. And I've patterned myself after that. And of course, they hired me to teach Latin American history at Parkdale High School. They just had a program where they're doing foreign exchange students with Honduras, and they wanted somebody with a background. And my professor, who was my advisor, forced me to take his Latin American history class. And that was the reason that I was the one chosen out of the 17 other people that applied for the job. But the book was terrible. And, I was just not, read this chapter and let's discuss it. It's a waste of time.
Right.
So I would go home at night and type dittos and make my own textbook. And then, the principal would call you in and say, you have to use the book because otherwise how are the students going to study? And I said, well, they will take notes, but I can fix that. So then for every daily lesson, I had what I called forced note-taking. I had a sheet with the vocabulary, some basic questions, some other odds and ends that the students could fill out while we're covering the material. And then at the end of the day, I would say, who's missing something?
Yeah.
And
Nice.
the kid would raise his hand, and I said, John, do you have that? And he says, yes, I do. And I said, well, then let him see it. And so they shared that information. And I did that in all my classes from that point on. Now, in the pre-computer days, it was a pain in the rear end to type, a couple of hundred dittos every year. I would change material to do stuff like that, and then have to deal with the faculty who bitched about me using all of this paper. I had the principal said, you're using a lot of paper. I said, you know what? I will buy my own paper if it comes to that. And he said, oh, you can't do that. That'll embarrass us. I said, okay, then let me do what I'm doing.
Let me teach.
It's just something. And that was the thing about this school. The school had spectacular teachers. They did all sorts of different things. And if the kids liked it, you could do whatever you wanted to do. So
nice.
That's and then I was trying to give them I've spent my whole life, I'm still doing it with podcasting, correcting misinformation.
Right.
It was a lot easier when I first started. Now it's like there's more misinformation than real information.
That's true.
In my college classes, they would say, Mr. Packett, that's not what I read on Wikipedia, and that's not what I listened to on YouTube. And I said, you people are going to have to read a real book sometime and find out that these people are just doing it off the top of their head. And I said, and Wikipedia is nice if you want background information, but I'm a field area expert, so I'm going to tell you that feudalism is not a social, political, and economic system. It's an economic system. They have something else for the rest. That's what we would always do. And I always, one of the things that I've been wanting to do some videos and give on teaching. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I did is I had a folder for they started out as 1/2-inch 3-ring binders, and they would have the notes, the forced note taking, articles that I had on that particular topic, every test, quiz, whatever. And then over the years, that they became 4-inch things. And I'd go to class and I'd set that down, and I'd have a kid every once in a while. And most of the time they knew not to do this, but one time I had a kid stand up and said, Mr. Packett, I think that's a lie. I think you're just making that up. And I said, all right, first of all, where's your evidence? Why am I wrong? If you show me I'm wrong, I'll change it. He said, well, I just don't believe it. And I said, well, you're 16. You don't know anything. But I tell you what I'll do. You come up here. I opened this gigantic folder to the section, pulled out the assignment, pulled out it was an article from the Institute of Napoleon at the Sorbonne on the topic I was talking about. And I said, here, take that home and read it tonight and come back in and tell me that I'm wrong. Right. He came in the next day and said, Mr. Packett, I can hardly read any of it. I said, yeah, that's because you're not smart enough to know what's going on. You only had to do that once in a while, and then, of course, they would stop that. I had a student just before we went out in 2020 when we went back home, they closed school down there at the college. Mm-hmm. And I had gotten to the bubonic plague just before that, and I talked about what was going on, and I had one of these guys in the country, and he didn't know squat, and his relative says this disease really didn't exist, and I said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. You just look at all this stuff. And then I had made a lecture of that, and put it up on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And I said, here's what the class is going to do. You're all going to go there and watch that. You have to. It's going to be marked, so you have to see it. Because when we go home, when we get locked down, that's how I'm going to run the class. And this kid, and I said, and if I'm wrong, you can just have a nice laugh, okay? 10 days later, we're out, and that's what we did. But we never came back. But I did get a note for him saying, I'm sorry, and wow, you really were right. But, I enjoy working with the kids. Well, working on the computer with them is not the same.
Right. No.
The physical activity.
So, let me ask you, in those early shows, at some point, like you said, it was pretty exponential growth, but was there a show or a series of shows that really blew up and suddenly you started getting a lot of attention? No,
it just, because at that time I was jumping around doing high interest things without really coming into doing a series, because I was still figuring out how many days I was going to do it.
Right.
I was doing it, I think I did it 5 days the first week, and then I did 7 days for a little while. And Ruth Ellen would say, you're killing me. I got to put all this stuff up. But yeah, that's, and then after a while, initially some of those were designed so that because I had retired from teaching by that time from high school, and I designed it so that some of the teachers could just pick that up on their computers and use it as a topic in their class or something like that, which worked wonderful until I was banned by the district. You couldn't, they wouldn't let you. It had to be approved by somebody over in central office. And it's like, you're kidding me. I went over to central office and got on their case, but said, if we start with you, where will it end? And said, that's
I love that. I just say, I remember early on when you started doing the different series, you'd pick a subject like the Old West or something like that, and those were fascinating to me. Because I live in Texas and we drive everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
As you know, in Texas, that anywhere you drive is a long drive. So we have lots of time.
Anywhere you drive is like traveling through 3 countries in Europe.
Yeah. I surprise people by telling them that El Paso is closer to California than it is to the other side of Texas.
Yeah. My father-in-law was from, he's from Oklahoma, but he was out in Alpine in West Texas. And his family was then in Shreveport, Louisiana. So we're going to take a week's vacation and drive across Texas.
I love it. So What has the show meant to you? What doors has it opened? Or is it just, hey, this is my thing?
Well, I have met all sorts of people. I have created monsters. Cameron Riley, who is probably the most successful of all the podcasters, and Don Carlin were our pod children. Mm-hmm. That's a term I use for people who went into podcasting after listening to me. So I've met lots of people. This past year, just a couple of months ago, we went on vacation to Scotland, Ireland, and Northern England. Nice. And we stayed at one of my listeners who's been listening for 15 years. I basically put him through university. And you meet people like that. My students will do that. It's also a way of continuing to teach. I've always disappointed to see that when people retire, they give up doing something. Yes. They now traveling is fine, but you have to be able to talk to somebody to pass something on. And the other thing is, imagine if it was possible to go back in time and record some of the lessons of Socrates or Plato. Oh, yeah. You become a brilliant teacher, and if nobody writes it down, if you don't have 12 apostles, if you don't have Plato for Socrates and others, and then it has to try and survive through all eternity to get to us, which is one of the reasons why there's an old saying that every country is 20 years from being destroyed, because that's the length of time of the memory of the average group of people.
Right.
And so I've done that. I enjoy it as a profession. One of the things that I did early on is my wife set up a filter so that if it's not a positive message, I don't get it.
Beautiful.
There are too many trolls out there. It's gotten worse now, but you have people. They'll just, let's pick on this person and make them feel bad. I don't care. I don't want to hear that. Same with YouTube. YouTube's got a filter that if it doesn't work, I don't see it, and I don't care. I don't need to have a whole bunch of that stuff. I don't know how these people live with Snapchat and all these other things that, look at me, and you're only generating X number of people that hate you and are just doing it for the heck of it. So, because I have kind of a soft skin, I put a lot of time into doing things, and when somebody comes back and says something, well, that's there have been times where I've nearly quit over certain things, but I just continue doing it. It's just that all the easy subjects have kind of disappeared in 15 years, and I'm stuck with bigger titles. And I know I have a lot of people who say, why don't you do more American history? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. I've done a series on the American Revolution, on the American Civil War. I've done the Spanish War. I've done all sorts of things. World War I. But I have stayed away from the more modern era because we have too many people who have lived through it, who only remember parts of it, and we have all kinds of odd books that come out. And so, you need to let all that stuff settle and deal with it in summertime, but at another time. But to me, my goal at this point is to cover as much ancient and medieval history as possible, because it's disappearing. Right. All over. When I first started teaching at Park Hill, you weren't required to take even American history. Mm-hmm. You came in as a sophomore. You had sophomore, junior, and senior. They had American history in the 9th grade. Right. And they didn't want to bring it into the high school. And we're going, you've got kids that are going all over the United States to fancy colleges, and you're killing them. Mm-hmm. They come back and say, I don't know anything about American history. I couldn't pass my initial American history class. Well, they didn't offer a Western Civ class. They had a 7th grade little junky thing. And they had one class that you could take if you wanted to, taught by one of the worst people on the whole school. He just basically did nothing. And, with global society, you've got to know more about other people. Mm-hmm. And so we finally, over the years, got all of those things included. But when I was made department chair, the next year I had to hire 4 people, and I hired 4 people just like me. They were all fanatics on the topic. I had a Civil War reenactor who I hired for American history. I had a gentleman who had been a vice president of Gallo Wines in Europe, who taught economics. Mm-hmm. And then I had a Western Civ teacher that we had to interview 3 times because the administration thought he was too smart. And another gentleman who was just a general person. The next year, our enrollment doubled. We had to hire 4 more people. And eventually it reached the point that they restricted the amount of social studies classes that you could take because we were bringing too many. And they all collected. Mm-hmm. So we would do a thing at the end of the year where we did it in the classroom initially, but we had too much stuff. And the school district did not like having swords and things laying out. So the VFW people in our community said, "Look, we'll open our building up for you for a week if you want to." So I would bring my collectibles, Napoleonic stuff, some of my World War II stuff. We had a display of actual artifacts that went from the American Revolution all the way to the Gulf War at one point. Mm-hmm. And we had people in the community would come in, and that's the kind of stuff we were always doing. I brought in military equipment to the class. That was, I brought in swords and stuff, and they kind of go, "What do you?" I said, all right, you could get sued. And I said, "Yeah, I know, and I'll take that chance because I'm not stupid, But so we did all of that. So all the podcasting lets me do that extra.
Nice.
As well.
What would you say is 2 questions? Your favorite era of history, and then secondly, your favorite era to teach, to see the reaction with the kids.
Oh, gosh. Okay. My favorite area is the Napoleonic Wars. Mm-hmm. But a very close second is the ancient world of ancient Greece and Rome. Now, that's pretty broad, but the two of them got to go hand to hand. And what was the second one?
To see the reaction from the students. Which era is the best for that?
Well, that's pretty easy. The Middle Ages is probably the easiest because I've got 5 suits of armor that I can wear that I've bought over the years. My first wife had many times said, "You're spending an awful lot of money on that stuff." I said, "Yeah, $250 for a suit of chainmail. My God, I've had $10,000 worth of fun with that." Yeah. But you could bring times in history where you can bring things in to physically see. Yeah. We're here. I'm in the Midwest. You have the same thing in Texas. Yeah. You talk about castles. There aren't any. You want to see a museum on that type of equipment? Well, there are some, and probably in Dallas and a couple of other places. Here we got the Nelson Art Gallery. They've got 2 suits of armor. It is not available. Everybody knows all there is to know about taking wagon trains across the West. And I've always I got in an argument with the chairman of the department at the college. He's an American historian. Mm-hmm. And he was in charge of selecting textbooks for Western Civ. So he calls me in and says, "This is the book we're going to use." I said, "Well, that's nice of you not to ask anybody." I said, "I realize that I'm just an adjunct professor, but I'm sure a couple of the other professors would have liked it." He said, "It's a really good book." I said, I see you have 2 books there." He said, "Yeah, that's the first semester and that's the second semester." I said, "How far are we supposed to go?" He said, "You go from the beginning to the end of the Renaissance, first semester." Mm-hmm. And then he started to talk about the second one. I said, wait a minute. So I have to cover 4,500 years of material in one semester. Oh, he said, "Well, you just kind of skip around." I said, "Bill, you teach American history, and and in many cases, you can't get from 1492 to the end of the American Civil War. Am I not correct?" "Well, yeah, I guess so." And I said, "Why don't you just pick one book, and then we'll all head out. Well, we got curriculum. I said, you have curriculum too, and you don't cover it either. So, yeah, but that's what they ended up doing, and it was always. And then you get in the position that in college, they're paying a fortune for these stupid things.
Yeah.
And I go, Mr. Packett, we're not using this book very much. I said, you know what? I would tell you not to buy it, but they'll fire me. I said, we're just stuck with it. I said, my suggestion is do without it at some point. But I said, I can't admit. Get a couple of you together and share them. I don't know what you want to do, but yeah, we've covered all this material. Was it all in your book? And he said, oh, you went through what was in the book in like 12 minutes. I said, yeah, I thought so, because it's not you. Yeah, that's the way it is. So, but it's problematic in education. You don't the district that I retired from, and I had all these wonderful people. Mm-hmm. What they do now? They won't hire anybody that has a field area master's degree. Huh. All they want are education specialists, which means they don't know shit. I look at my little thing that we're doing in class. What are they learning? I don't know, but it looks good. So well, we're not going to fix the education system today. But, no. But see, the problem with talking to me is we could talk for years.
Well, I'm going to try to get us back to the podcast.
Okay.
So, if somebody thinks they may like history and may like your style, because I can tell them, your style is wonderful. It's amazing to listen to. What show or series of shows would you recommend they start with?
Oh, gosh. I'll tell you what, if I were going to pick a show and a series, it would be the Life of William Marshall. Uh-huh. I think the Life of William Marshall has everything. It's an important period of time. As a fascinating character who's done all kinds of interesting things. I mean, when at the age of 70, the King of England accuses you of stealing money and he challenges you to a trial by combat, and no one will pick up the glove. We got an interesting character.
Yeah.
That's one that will be interesting from the very beginning, and it's just one CD, I think, just a little bit like that. This is the other problem. I've done almost 6,000 shows.
Right.
And at one time, with my wife who set everything up, Ruth Ellen, I said, Ruth Ellen, why don't we take these shows and put them so that people can buy them if they wanted to buy that particular show, okay? And she did about 250 to 400 of them early on, but it was always, she never saw the big picture. All she saw was, God, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I wasn't counting on making, I think I was only charging $0.25 to download them. And I was still making like $50, $60 a month. Mm-hmm. And she couldn't believe it. And I said, oh, okay. But she didn't make a backup of that system.
Oh, no.
And we had one of the sites that she saved stuff to, that particular site, failed, and we lost all that material. And there was no putting it back together again. So I have that archive, which is just the last 30 shows or something like that. But that's the hard part. I mean, if it's a modern show, I think you could listen to like the Mistresses. That's an interesting, fun series. But whatever they're interested topic-wise, if they're Civil War people, the Civil War series, or even if you just started with the first one on the causes, you kind of get the message pretty quickly.
Right.
Of how that goes. And of course, now I'm doing all this stuff on YouTube as well.
Right.
So for example, I have all of those shows that I did and all those lessons that I made for when we were locked down that year. Right. And then I finished it. So I have my whole History 134 class available on video. But you get that one, you can go there and see an individual show. Mm-hmm. But frequently, a lot of those, are similar to what I did with lessons. But again, I have the Wild West. There's plenty of good stuff to go there. I have a lot of listeners in Europe, and the thing about what the Europeans find is I'm covering a material that their states refuse to tell them.
Oh, right.
And the oddest example is when I was doing the Russo-Japanese War.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm doing the Russo-Japanese War, and I get an email from somewhere. And he says, I enjoy your podcast. It's very hard to get them because China blocks practically everything, but they don't understand. They understand history according to Bob, but one of the other ways you can get it is go to Summa Historica. They never understood that. So this guy was still getting stuff. And he said, I've been to a lot of those sites in Korea, and he listed some of them. And they're in North Korea.
Yeah.
And he says, this site, they have bulldozed everything. There literally is nothing to show for these. And I found out years later, after he fled the Soviet Union, that he was a Russian engineer who was fascinated with the Russo-Japanese War. And he was going to all these sites that I was talking about while he was there working in North Korea. So that was about as bizarre as you can get. But I've had English people say, they don't talk about the English Civil War anymore. Of course, now they call it the War of the Three Kingdoms. And I got one more podcast, and then that one is finished. But so all different. There's all different things to choose from. The problem is one of the things that we're going to do, and you can do it now. For example, you obviously saw the podcast or heard the podcast where I talked about, if you want the complete history of French Revolution and Napoleon, you can order it. Well, I can do that with anything. It's just that we have to revamp the entire website, and we're going to go to where everything is electronic, and I'll send you a USB or an SD card.
Yeah, right.
And then it's $5 a shot. It's not that big of a deal.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned the Napoleonic Wars. Have you seen the film Napoleon yet, the new one?
I am waiting for my good friend who took 3 interviews in order to hire to come back, and then we're going to go. I've seen all of the trailers, and I always figure that the trailers are the best part, but I've already pulled out about 8 different things that really didn't take place.
Well, that's what I wanted to mention. My wife and I just went and saw it, and the big takeaway is it's long.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of inconsistencies that we can maybe talk on a future show about.
Yeah. I watched an interview with Ridley Scott, and they talked about all this. And he says, well, there are like 400 books on Napoleon. And I'm like, what? Maybe you have 400 books on Napoleon, but there's a lot more than that. And he was saying everything that we did, we can show in one of our sources that happened. Well, yeah, of course. There's a British version. There's a Austrian. There's all those different. But the one that really got me was when I saw them fire the cannon and hit the top of the pyramid.
Yes, that's exactly. That was the first one.
I don't care how you elevate a cannon. You couldn't. At least you didn't shoot the nose of the Sphinx, which they didn't do anyway. And then
my wife leaned over and said, "Did that happen?"
Yeah.
No.
And then the lake thing that with the soldiers crossing the lake and in Austerlitz. Well, now that actually happened, but not that way.
Right.
That's portrayed as if here's the major Austrians are coming right towards us. No. They were already whipped by the time this event takes place. There's a group of them retreating over the frozen lake, and the French fired the cannonballs to get to them. But that lake has been drained, and it never had – it had some rifles and some other things, but not the quantity that you would expect. So that was just one of those things that kind of gets put in there. I liked from what I could tell, that how Joaquin Phoenix played. Yeah. I understand he's shown as a brooding individual, but I can see that in the writings that I've got all his letters and stuff. But it's one of those things that anytime a movie like that comes out, like when the Da Vinci Code came out. all the kids, that's all they wanted to talk about is the Da Vinci Code. So, I have to go back through and go, no, here's where the information. And then they go, oh, does this drive you nuts, Mr. Packett? And I said, it's my job.
Yeah.
It's my job to make sure that you know what's right. And that's why you take history. That's why you read 12 sources to write your assignment. Not one that you like. So, there's plenty of teachable moments. And when they hired me to teach Latin American history, and I taught basically Mesoamerican history, the Native Americans, the native sites, that was the time of Chariots of Gods and Eric von Däniken. Yep. So 70% of my students believed that all that stuff was done by aliens. But by the time I was done, no, they didn't believe that anymore. But that's a fun challenge.
Well, like I said, we could talk forever, and I'm honored to be interviewing you because, like I said, I loved your show early on, and I just want more people to realize that it's out there and that you are what I consider an everyday hero.
Now, I really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Chris.
Take care, Bob.